This is the examination of the hidden human condition.
You're listening to the Hidden Killers Podcast.
This is the Hidden Killers Podcast with Tony Brueski.
Lori Hellis is joining with us, attorney and author. We're going to be talking about Bryan Kohberger and the appearance he made last week in the courtroom in that shiny new suit. And then his attorney basically complaining about media coverage and people being unfair and people saying mean things about Bryan Kohberger because, well, the evidence looks horrible against him. And yeah, it really does. What are your thoughts, Lori, as an attorney, on how that all went down in the presentation from Ann Taylor and Kohberger?
Well, in typical Idaho form, Idaho has been certainly has limited a lot of the video coverage over the Daybell case. And now it appears they're kind of going the same direction with Kohberger. I thought it was interesting. The Daybell case, they started quite early, having them both in street attire rather than prison garb. Uh-huh. And I think that's fairly typical in high visibility cases because the more that the public and the jury pool, the potential jury pool, see that person in jail garb, the more they associate them with being guilty.
Sure.
So it's a pretty typical move on the part of the defense. I was actually a little surprised that he appeared as often as he did in an orange jumpsuit. So I think that's pretty typical, and I think you'll see him in street clothes from now on.
Sure. A lot of the issues in that hearing were stemming over media coverage. Those of us reporting responsibly were just kind of doing our job. It may not look very good because of the evidence, but it is reality. Of course, there are some extreme people out there, some YouTubers with very bizarre theories that really do go off the rails and get into slanderous territory. But what I'm kind of shocked by is the fact that they're even making an argument about this as if it somehow really affects the case. I understand how it can affect getting an unbiased jury and such, but people are going to talk. This is how our society now works. It seems like they're just kind of arguing against how they don't like how our society communicates today. But I don't understand how they think they're really going to change much of it or bringing in a media expert to say who has the most influence over others on this topic. It seemed kind of bizarre, almost grasping at straws here.
Well, I agree that the way that criminal cases in particular are covered has changed drastically in the last, say, 5 years. We certainly have gotten to the point where anybody with a microphone and a camera can become an expert on something.
Sure.
And unfortunately, we do have those fringe people who are camping on people's sidewalks outside their homes and making outrageous conspiracy theory claims that are impacting people's ability to get a fair trial. And I don't really envy judges who have to try and balance the need for a fair trial against the people's First Amendment rights. I mean, forever we've had responsible journalists who follow journalistic ethics, who ascribe to the idea that the people have a right to know and do their very best to provide unbiased and balanced coverage, are in some ways being supplanted by people who really have different agendas. And the agenda may be an economic one, making money off the cases, or it may be one that is more, I don't know, maybe political, more of the conspiracy theory sorts of ideas. And I think that's a difficult ask for judges to be able to balance those two things. I don't really blame the judges for coming down on the side of assuring justice for defendants at the risk of limiting people's access, at least immediate access. I think we've become a society where we are completely plugged into that 24-hour news cycle.
Sure.
We expect to be able to access information immediately. We're not good at waiting. So I can see how those two forces are really opposed to one another and create a lot of conflict and a lot of friction.
Does a gag order, though, in a case like this, does it cause more rampant speculation and rumors versus if the family or attorneys could speak to the narrative on the case?
Sure. I think we saw that a lot in the Vallow case.
Yeah.
I think we saw a lot of speculation that turned out to be groundless because there was this vacuum of information in the case. And particularly in the Vallow case, where there was a very long period of time where, thanks in part to COVID, where an investigation was going on behind the scenes and nobody knew what was going on. And we saw that to a certain extent in Kohberger during the time after the murders happened and before Kohberger was arrested, that period of time of public frustration that nothing seemed to be happening. And, it was completely understandable as to why police would not want to release information of this very sensitive and ongoing investigation. But it certainly led to a lot of speculation and a lot of false rumors happening out there.
Sure. Let me get your take on this. Kohberger's team asking for more time to respond to prosecutors' request for an alibi. I think on the surface, to someone on the outside, we look at this and we go, okay, you're being accused of murder on this very specific night, on this very specific day. If you didn't do it, an alibi shouldn't take days, months, weeks, years to come up with. You would think if you have a solid alibi, you could just present that alibi. Why would you need so much more time to put together an alibi?
Well, true. I think it's more a case of the defense saying, before we put this alibi out, we really want to make sure that we have been through all of the prosecution's information, all of the evidence against Mr. Kohberger, to make sure that we can line up our alibi with what the prosecution has. Now, I mean, I think that's natural in the case of defense attorneys to say, we want to make sure that we have all our ducks in a row. We want to make sure that what we're saying lines up with the evidence, that we haven't missed anything in the evidence that the prosecution has given us. I think that we more and more are seeing in these kind of cases where prosecution discovery is being handed over in terabytes. Yeah. We're talking 50 terabytes of information.
Yeah.
A lot of that is raw data. It's cell phone data. It's GPS data. And it has to be processed in a way that makes it understandable.
Sure.
So I sort of understand. Part of it is Idaho's statute as well.
How so?
Well, because Idaho says that the statute says, if the prosecution asks the defense, what's your alibi? Then the defense has 10 days to provide that information to the prosecution. That timeline made perfect sense when we were talking about discovery that was in a handful of police reports. But now we're talking about volumes of electronic information that are certainly going to make it more difficult to be sure that you've got all the information. So I don't think it's that unusual for the defense to be saying we need more than 10 days to respond to the prosecution's request.
This is an examination of the hidden human condition.
This is the Hidden Killers Podcast.
The Hidden Killers Podcast.
With Tony Brueski.
You want to weigh in on any of the cases that we're following for you right here? 888-554-5537 is the phone number. 888-5-KILLER We would love to hear your feedback and your voice on any of the stories we're following for you here on the Hidden Killers podcast. My name's Tony Brueski. Follow me on Twitter at TonyBPod. Stay with us.